My name is Malin Forsgren. I'm from the consultancy firm 2050, and I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Yelistratova, colleague to Malin.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what 2050 is in a short while. I just wanted to check, there are people here who don't speak Swedish, right? Good. So we don't speak English for 3 hours for nothing.
I mean, you could speak Swedish.
No, but we promised it should be in English. I just wanted to make sure that you know, sometimes it's a bit embarrassing when you realize you're speaking English and everybody else is Swedish. So, good. So, if you haven't done this yet, I really suggest you do. Menti.com, the code is 402611. We would like to see your answers to this little short survey because it actually relates to what we're going to do today. So don't miss out on doing that. Let me just give you a few words on the consultancy firm 2050. We were formed a couple of years ago, and our vision is... Oops, sorry. A profitable business on a healthy planet. In Swedish we say goda affärer på en planet i balans. So this is my free translation. We essentially work with clients that want to increase their sustainability, but also to maintain or increase their profitability and to use their sustainability work to improve their business performance. We do that through analysis, communication, and business development. And what do we mean with analysis? Well, we work a lot with digging into figures and trying to get the facts on the table. But we also believe it's really important to communicate your sustainability work, because if you don't, then nobody's going to know about it. You're not going to be able to reap the benefits from it, and it's also a much stronger commitment from a company that's actually communicated their sustainability work. Business development is there because if we don't make this part of the regular business processes, it never becomes an integrated part of the company's operations. And if it's not an integrated part of the company's operations, it's less likely that you're actually going to reap any benefits from it. We work in the border area, or gränsland as we say in Swedish, between politics, research and business. So we work a lot with people from the different parts of society to reach our targets. I'm not going to talk more about 2050 because that's not why you are here, but I'm going to hand over to Anna, my friend. I'm just going to show you this code again, if you missed it, 402611. And then Anna, please start, and maybe we should show them the agenda for today.
Yes, we will show the agenda for today. So, my name is Anna Yelistratova. I am Malin's colleague, based here in Malmö, 2050 Malmö. And today, after our short introduction, where we'll be speaking about global challenges and Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, we will move to 3 different workshops where we will ask you, the participants, to discuss different Sustainable Development Goals, to choose those that are most relevant for your operations, and then to see how you can actually use your knowledge about these goals and how you can help your clients and customers meet their sustainability challenges and use that in your marketing communication. So this is the agenda for today. Short coffee break at 3 o'clock in an hour, and then we will wrap up at about 5 p.m. And now I will briefly introduce you to some most relevant, most present challenges, sustainability challenges in the world. Most of you have certainly heard about them, read about them, know about them. But still, it's always very nice to scare people a little bit when you speak about sustainability. And we will do that by showing you this brief film. This movie was produced by NASA based on data from 2,300 weather stations globally. And they have registered that for the last 30 years, the average temperature in the world has been growing constantly. And last year was the warmest ever since they have begun to register temperatures in the world. Of course, you have heard that Sweden is great in sustainability. We have...
No, wait.
No? Oh, yep. We have... we know what to do. We decrease our emissions. We pollute less. We are quite well off. Have you heard about that? Is it true? This graph shows our annual production-based carbon emissions per capita. It shows that in Sweden, in our country, we emit less when we produce. So we produce less, or we produce in a more efficient way. At the same time, when we combine these emissions with emissions that we are accountable for when we consume things, there is no decrease at all during the last 5 years. If we look at production-based emissions, Sweden is an average of 4 ton carbon dioxide per capita. If we look at consumption-based emissions, we're about 11 ton. So it's more than half more than only production-based, which means that we actually consume even more than we used to. And this is where our impact lies. If the entire world had lived according to Swedish norms, we would need 4,2 planets. One of the consequences, there are lots of other consequences, is that our ices, like the Arctic ices, are melting. And today I read that Antarctic has lost 3 times more ice during the last years than previously. One of the reasons is definitely climate change. I mean, this is quite obvious. This is not rocket science. We are warming the planet up, so of course the ice is melting. This picture shows actually something that is quite ironic and sad at the same time. The doomsday seed vault that was built to preserve the planet's biological diversity in case something terrible happens to the planet, like a war, a natural catastrophe, was overflooded by the melting ice. According to the World Economic Forum, according to this report that they presented during the Davos summit this year, 5 most impactful risks are weapon of mass destruction, weather events, natural disasters, climate change mitigation, water crisis. So 4 out of 5 are climate-related, environmentally related risks. Sweden is one of the countries where people worry a lot about environment, especially young people. We read a lot about young people being stressed by the environmental concerns. At the same time, when we look at this graph that presents water waste in the world, we can see that over here we have water as number 7, food crisis, the 7th most impactful risk globally. But in Europe, we actually waste nearly as much food as in North America, Oceania. Industrialized Asia is also one of the top 3 regions of the world. Production waste of food is approximately the same around the world, but we waste so much food, which means that we emit carbon dioxide while producing food in vain. At the same time, we have world hunger, we have millions of people who are undernourished, we have millions of children who die because they're undernourished, and we waste food. Some other issues, global issues, unemployment, rising income inequality, despite the fact that people on average become more well-off in the world, the gap between the richest and the poorest is increasing every year. low productivity, knowledge gap, technological gap. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said that we are the first generation that is actually able to stop the global poverty, and we are the last generation that can do something about the climate change. So if we don't do anything, nothing will happen. There are some trends that are both induced by these challenges and that somehow lie behind these challenges. Climate is always in the center when we speak about sustainability. Climate is the core. Even when we speak about the Sustainable Development Goals, it's very common to say that the climate goal is the one that many other goals are built around. So climate change and resource scarcity is something that drives development globally very strongly. If you have operations in countries that risk floodings and storms, of course you have to take this into account. If you have markets in the countries with high risk for climate refugees, of course you will have to deal with that. Some other trends that are very directly connected to sustainability challenges are digitalisation, which is a very big part of the modern discussion about sustainability. You cannot be sustainable and analog. You have to digitalize. You have to be more effective with your resources, with your personnel, with your customers, with your communication. Urbanization, both because of the sustainability challenges and due to them. It's very common to say that the future of sustainability lies in cities, not in countries, but in cities. Even today we see that cities like New York, London, Hamburg, they become more like hubs of sustainable solutions. Globalization, which is both a reason for and a consequence of many global challenges. And of course, demographical shifts, the aging population, at the same time as we have a growing population. Right now we are 7 billion people in the world, soon we'll be 9 billion people in the world, and how the planet will manage 9 billion people, we don't know yet. But is there anything that is being done to fix that problem? One of the first steps, one of the real first steps, was taken 3 years ago, no, 2.5, in Paris, on the 12th of December 2015. About 200 countries signed a Paris Agreement during a COP21, the UN conference, and I will leave the floor to my colleague Malin, who will guide you through the result of this meeting. That is the sustainability agenda, the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, actually, the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, was actually agreed on by the United Nations already in September 2015. And one of the, as Anna was saying, one of the main, really most important targets for the entire agenda is the climate challenge, which was then dealt with in Paris 3 months later. So that 2015, I think we can say, was a year of amazing global unity. But now I want to take you through a crash course of Agenda 2030 or Sustainable Development Goals, or the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They have many names. You've probably seen this. And how many of you know Agenda 2030 properly? Hands up. Okay, great. Otherwise, this would be in vain. But this would take 3 hours normally. I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. So listen carefully. What we can say about the 17 targets that were defined by the entire world in the United Nations was that they are universal. That means they apply to everybody. This is a big difference from the targets that were set before the Millennium Goals, because the Millennium Goals were mainly targeted towards developing countries. So for us, unless we were working in companies that were directly involved with developing countries, or we were traveling there, or for other reasons had things to do with developing countries, we weren't really affected by those targets that much. The Agenda 2030, however, is applicable for everybody in the entire world. They are indivisible. It means you can't just single out one target and say, we don't care about the other targets, because they are very tightly interconnected and they are integrated. It's funny when you start reading the details, you could essentially do arrows between all the targets and it would look like an immense spider web, because they are so heavily integrated. What the United Nations said is that, yes, this is a target that, of course, is the main responsibility for the government, but essentially, no, it's actually for everybody. It's for local authorities, it's for institutions, it's for business, it's for the private sector, it's for you and me. We all are bound by these targets that have been agreed on an international level. And that is quite revolutionary in the history of the world, so I don't think we can use what's been going on in the past to evaluate how the world is going to manage these targets. Now, I want to take you through these targets, but I don't want to do it in the maybe normal way. I want you to see the vision behind these targets, because when you really start studying them, when you really start reading about them, they are absolutely amazing. It's a fantastic framework for everybody, for private people, for companies, for everybody. Because who could ever say that, no, we don't want a world where there's no poverty or zero hunger? Nobody would say, yeah, I want that world. And that's exactly what target number 1, no poverty, and it's for everybody in all forms everywhere. Which means that even a country which is fairly affluent, like Sweden, actually has to consider what kind of poverty do we have in our country? What do we need to do about that? Zero hunger. This is not just about, people not starving. It's also about considering food security, which is actually starting to become visible with Swedish authorities. We're talking more about food security. 3-4 years ago, you didn't hear anybody saying, oh, it's a problem that we only produce 50% of the food we consume in Sweden ourselves. We import the rest. Well, considering the waste, it wouldn't be that big a problem maybe, because we virtually throw away half of it. But this has become higher up on the agenda, not only because of Putin, it's actually because we're starting to realize maybe we need to make sure we're a little bit more self-reliant on our food consumption. It's also about nutrition. It's one thing to be well-fed, but as you know, a lot of us are quite overfed, and some of those people are not well-nourished. They eat a lot of bad things. So it's everything around having a healthy food situation in the entire world. So this is not the least applicable to countries like Mexico, the United States, Sweden, the entire Western world, or the United Arab Emirates, where they have huge problems with this nowadays. And it's, of course, to have a sustainable agriculture. We can't solve this problem by going completely bullocks with the agriculture. It has to be done in a sustainable way. Another part of this vision is to have good health and well-being and quality education. Who would reject this? Who would say that this is not a universal right to people? Well, we really need to start working on that. And what I like with these targets is that they go into detail. They're not just, blah, blah, blah on a high level. In this case, for instance, when they follow up the good health and well-being target, which they do every year now for every country in the world. This is all available on the United Nations homepage for the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's actually quite accessible information. And when they did the evaluation, I think it's for 2017, of course, yeah. They go through, okay, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, what's the status with infectious diseases, and they go through all the statistics, the non-communicable diseases, which has everything to do with drug abuse and alcoholism and other kinds of diseases, mental health, other health risks? What about the health systems, the funding of these? How is this developing in the world? And because you're in the health tech, so I just wanted us to go through, or to have a look at this page, the targets and indicators for this target. So if you go into this web page, I'm sure you can't see now because it's too small letters, but it's quite cool because you have, you can't see it. I hate PowerPoint when it does this. Anyway, I'll explain it to you, because if I start fiddling with this, it's probably going to go something wrong. So what it has is, it has a page for each target, and it has sub-targets. And the sub-targets are very concrete. And they would say things, for instance, like, let me see here. By 2030, reduce the global maternal mortality ratio to less than 70 per 100,000 live births. They put extremely concrete targets, very, so to speak, high up in the hierarchy. And then, underneath this, they have indicators that are even more detailed, so that they can actually follow up on these targets, country by country. And this can be done region by region, municipality by municipality, and even in some cases, company by company. Maybe not when it comes to mortality of children, but you see what I mean. It's a really, really smart system. It's like a framework for people to start speaking the same language about the global challenges we have. So, but you're going to go into this particular target more later, I suppose. Of course, quality education. It's not just about having quality education, but it should be available for everybody, and everybody should have access to the same kind of quality, and it should also be possible to continue to educate yourself all through your life. That's what this target says. And then another vision is a full gender equality everywhere. Maybe not everybody would sign this, but I guess us in Sweden do, right? So, of course, target number 5 is gender equality, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And there is actually another target about equality from other perspectives, but they have singled out equality for women and girls as a specific target because they consider it to be such a big challenge in many parts of the world. There's clean water and sanitation for everyone. This is a very important challenge to improve health in many countries, so it's been singled out as target number 6. And it's to have water available and that it's clean everywhere in the world. And this is actually not just a health issue, this is also an environmental issue, because we do have a huge challenge with fresh water, availability of fresh water when the glaciers are melting in many countries, etc. So they're all interconnected. Okay, so this one didn't work. So you'll have to see me running back and forth here. Affordable and clean energy has helped to create decent work and economic growth. They connect these quite tightly, the clean energy, availability of clean energy and the access to clean energy with the possibility to actually expand the work opportunities for people around the world. Not just because there's a lot of job opportunities in the clean energy sector, but also because clean energy will enable growth of industries that in a sustainable way. And in addition to this, the prosperity is fueled by investments in industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So these targets are not just about, poverty or health or education. They're actually going into the industrial aspects as well in many countries. How do you develop sustainable industries? So this gives us the 3 targets where you have affordable and clean energy for everybody. Where you have decent work and economic growth, and here's everything that has to do with productivity included as well, and it's sustainable economic growth. It's economic growth that takes into consideration the environmental challenges. as well as industry, innovation, and infrastructure, where how can we foster innovation, entrepreneurship? That's put in the United Nations targets for the entire world. Reduced inequalities. So as I was saying before, the girl and women issue is actually put in a separate target, but it's actually very tightly connected to this, of course, because it does say that we should have reduced inequality within countries. All the citizens, the inequality between citizens should decrease in all countries, but also between countries. The division between different countries is an aim of the United Nations to be less and not growing as it is right now. We live in sustainable cities and communities. We know that urbanization is a huge trend all over the world. It's a big problem when you get cities like Delhi. I don't know if you read the newspapers the last couple of days. It was bad before, but it's so bad now that, you know, they've had one day with decent levels of air quality since New Year. And I read a number that I think was 1.8 million people die every year in India because of poor air quality, because they constructed the cities in ways that it's not sustainable. So of course, to make cities and all human settlements, I live in the countryside. I mean, also the countryside needs to work and have a sustainable infrastructure. And the communities need to be resilient. They need to be able to handle any kind of, the adaptation to climate change, etc. One of the most important targets, at least when it comes to connected to the climate, is actually responsible consumption and production. This is one of the targets where Sweden is in red in the evaluation by the United Nations, because we have nothing like responsible consumption and production today. And this is related to decoupling the economic growth from natural resource usage. We need to be able to develop without pressing nature more. And this is fundamental to sustainable development, and requires both businesses to be sustainable and consumer behavior, of course. And here they include a lot of the management of waste and chemicals in these targets. And then, of course, we talked about the climate changes that Anna mentioned. This is really important. And in this target, it's very much related to the Paris Agreement that came after. But it's also included a lot of climate change adaptation, which is very important in many countries. I don't know if anybody here has a summer house in Falsterbo. One, okay. Sad for you. Congratulations to the rest of you, depending on where it is situated. But a lot of people are actually facing quite big risks. And in Sweden, it's a pity because, we have values on houses, etc., that are going to drop. But half of Bangladesh is at big risk of disappearing. A lot of countries are actually at big risk. And now, as Anna was saying, in the newspapers lately, researchers have come up with findings that the Antarctic is actually melting. The last 5 years, it's been melting 3 times as fast as the years before. That's quite a lot of ice. And it has a potential to actually increase the level of the sea with like 58 meters or something. It's not going to happen in our lifetime because it's far too thick, the ice. But it can increase the sea level rising much faster than we thought. And this is a huge challenge to especially very low-lying countries and cities that we need to manage. You've all heard about the plastic problems in the sea. Well, we're not really managing a flourishing life below water right now, which is the vision of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In this goal is included everything from marine pollution, i.e. Both waste and sewage, etc. It's ozone acidification, which is tightly connected to transport systems because of the acidification from the emissions from transport, which is, of course, also related to climate change. The ecosystems, when ecosystems are torn down, it's very difficult sometimes to foresee the consequences. So this is also very heavily related to many of the other targets. And overfishing is a huge issue as well here. So life below water is a very important target. Then we have life on land. I don't remember the figure, but I think it was 70% of all the little bees and wasps and whatnot in France or Germany have disappeared. And I don't know if you've thought about it, when you drive on a highway in Sweden, you don't get as much shit on your windscreen, which is nice because you don't have to wash the car as often, but it's really, really bad for the ecosystems. And it's really bad for the farmers, because who's going to pollinate? In China, they've started to pollinate by hand in certain cherry plantations. That is not, it's a great way of fixing jobs for people, but it's not a sustainable way of sorting out our food production in the future. This is a huge issue, and it's not only, of course, the small little animals, but the biodiversity loss right now is at the highest rate ever in the world's history. It's called the 6th biggest extinction wave in the world history, in the entire planet history. We need to stop this because this is also tightly related to the ecosystems, etc. And then they talk about, whatever we do with all this, if we don't have some kind of peace among countries, it's very difficult to get Syria to work on the climate change problem right now, or to have, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, because they have so many other problems that are so here and now with bombs here and there and whatever. So peace and some kind of legal systems and institutions that are working is really essential. And here I think this is maybe one of the targets where Sweden doesn't have that big a problem. Well, in Gothenburg they do, but not the rest of Sweden. But strong institutions, it's really important to manage all the other targets. So the last target is quite interesting because it says we're not going to manage this on our own. We need partnerships. So target number 17 is about partnerships for the goals. Did you know this? Were you aware of this partnership target? No, okay. It's quite funny when you ask companies like Scania has adapted Agenda 2030 really heavily. They say this is one of the most important targets for them because they know that they're not going to be able to change the entire transportation industry by themselves. They need to work together with people. So they're in lots of cooperations now with Volvo, agroethanol for ethanol trucks, biogas producers. They're working so much in different cooperation projects to find new solutions to develop their solutions for the future. So this is a really important target for very many entities to work with these goals. So this is the entire vision. And I think it's not just a really smart system of targets, it's actually very beautiful. It's a beautiful vision of what the world should look like. And I think we all can sign this. I don't know, I can't even figure out, even Sverigedemokraterna should be able to sign this. I'm sorry to be like that, but I don't mean to be fördomsfull. But I think that everybody should be able to agree to this, whatever political standpoint you have, whatever approach you have. Then maybe you want the solutions to look a little bit different and you want to do it in different ways. That's another story. But that this is really a good vision for the world. So normally when we talk, Anna was saying that the climate issue is in the center, and we are a little bit, of course, colored by what we work with here. But what people say is that the 4 targets that are directly related to the environment, life on land, life on below water, clean water and sanitation, and the climate change, those need to be the outer frame for the others. Because if we don't have those, as you know, we can't transcend those limits, because we can't create more planets. We need to work within the planet we have. And then people many times look at the more societal targets, as the next boundary to stay within, because that's to take care of the people on the planet. And within these frameworks, the economical development should be pushed and should be enhanced. And that's how many people look at the Agenda 2030. So now the question is, what is your view on the status of the world? And that's going to be very interesting to see, because we checked you with Mentimeter, right? And now I really want to get this on the board. We'll see if I can manage that. Yes. Okay, so let's start checking what you answered. In the last 20 years, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty worldwide has. Well, quite a lot of people think it's almost doubled. Is that correct? No. Nope, it's almost halved. So it's become... Why are we doing... I should say that before we go through this. Why are we doing this? Well, if you don't know what the status is of the world now, if you have the wrong assumptions, you're going to draw the wrong conclusions of what you need to do, right? And you work in a sector that's, all sectors are very tightly related to the Agenda 2030 targets, but your sector even more than maybe most others, or at least more obviously so. And if you don't know what the status in the world is, you may actually come with solutions that aren't appropriate to the existing situation. So this is just a sample. I'm not saying that these figures are going to give you that much guidance, but it will maybe give you some guidance to, okay, maybe I need to check these assumptions I have for my solutions. So it's almost half, so a little bit more than half of you could answer that. Well, that's great. It's better than 3 monkeys throwing a dart. And I'm not kidding, because most people can't answer these questions. So this is better than the average, actually. Okay, why am I not getting the next? Oh, here. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? Well, it's only 19% that thought 80%, but that's actually the true figure. So the monkeys would have made a better job here. So it's improved so much during the last 20 years that it's almost impossible to believe. And maybe that's, Bill Gates has maybe something to do with it, and a lot of other institutions, but things have improved. Do you think this is correct? Low-income countries? Nope. Most countries are actually middle-income. Most people live in middle-income countries today. And I went to Vietnam last year and had a lot of business discussions with some Swedish companies and Vietnamese partners, and they were all talking about aid, and we were like, Sweden isn't giving aid to Vietnam anymore because you're a middle-income country. And it's difficult for them to take in, but it's the truth. They need to learn to live with that. This is interesting. Have you seen Hans Rosling? This is actually from Gapminder. I hope you see, thanks to Gapminder. I've stolen the questions. So this comes from Hans Rosling's question that he normally puts. Actually, we're not going to have more children in 2100. We're going to have a lot of more elderly people, but we're not going to have more children. So it's probably us here that are going to be the burden to the world, but it's not going to be the children, because they're going to be the same amount. We've stopped giving birth to more children than there's a balance there now. But it's going to take some time before it evens out, because people live so much longer, because we're so much healthier. So that's maybe our problem. A little disease could fix that. How many people in the world have some access to electricity? Don't quote me on that, by the way. So 80% is the true figure, have some access. So it's not like they have maybe 24 hours a day. It may not be that good, but some access. But there's still 20%. So it's still like, 1.4 billion people that don't have some access to electricity. That's horrendous, I think. How many grown-ups above 15? Well, this is actually not from Gapminder, so they didn't get credit here. And I'm trying to remember where I think I found this from the follow-up on the Millennium Goals. But it's actually 84%. What's the life expectancy? What do you think? You're starting to see a trend in my questions here? 70 years, yeah. That's the average life expectancy. My dad, who's 75, he said, I don't understand it could be 82 in Sweden, because every time I open the papers, there's someone the same age as me that died. And you know, where are the older people that die? He didn't get the statistics right, but where is this arrow now? Internet. Come on. Is that the last question, maybe? I think so. Yeah, it is the last question. Okay, so you see, there's a lot of assumptions here where we think the world is that we maybe need to challenge now and then. Now, just very quickly, so how does this concern companies? Well, Ban Ki-moon said that companies can both contribute and have a responsibility and are asked to help out to reach all these ambitious targets. And it's also been calculated that the cost of reaching these targets is going to be $4,500 billion per year on a global level, which sounds horrendous. When you think about it, you go, who's going to pay all this? And I don't have the answer to that, but what I do know is that that actually means that there are huge business opportunities, because someone's going to get that money. So there's going to be a huge shift, and nobody probably believes that the entire world is going to reach these targets 100% until 2030. Maybe it takes until 2040 or 2050. But the trend and the direction is for sure there. There is an improvement year by year, and a lot of investment is going into this from governments, from people, from institutions, from companies. And so there's a lot to make. A lot of companies are actually also adhering to Agenda 2030. So for those of you who are working towards other corporates, with corporate customers, larger corporations, they are for sure doing this and aligning to the Agenda 2030 targets. Like IKEA, like Unilever, Volvo, etc. You'll find, I mean, you can essentially see that the big companies in Sweden are already there. The big companies in the Western world are more or less there already. It's now coming more and more to the middle-sized and smaller companies, more and more. But the bigger companies are always first, of course. There are 17 targets that, like I said, each target has sub-targets. That's what I was trying to show before and failed. And each sub-target has indicators. So it's a great way for the world to follow up what's going on with these and to structure the work around it. And what all these picked images actually with different colors come from the 4 official Agenda 2030 communication packages. So it's open for everybody to use. And the funny thing is it's been developed by the company who's in the next room. What are they called again? New Republic, right? Isn't it them who developed it? I think so, anyway.
They will come tomorrow and talk about communication.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So what they say themselves in the people who have been working with this in the United Nations is, I mean, the first step is, of course, for every company to understand the SDGs, and that's what we tried to give you some overview now. Defining the priorities is really important. You need to know which of these targets are relevant for you. You can't look at all 17. Which of the targets are most relevant to your customers and yourselves? And setting the goals, integrating them in your operations, and reporting and communicating. Many companies look at the value chain when they do this analysis of which targets are relevant. They go through from everything from product development to their customer usage, and they say these targets are the most relevant in different parts of the chain. And some targets, the company can have an increased positive impact if they change the way they do business, and in others they can reduce the negative impact. This kind of exercise is quite useful to do, and in many cases, at least it's useful to do from a customer perspective. Where in the operations can we help to increase positive impact or decrease negative impact? And
Can you talk anything about Vinnova?
No, I won't talk about Vinnova.
Won't talk about Vinnova.
No, someone else can do that.
A little bit. If you are applying for financing from any of the calls from Vinnova, you are requested to answer a question that is about those sustainability goals and how your business is relating to it. So this is extremely important, not just for the big corporates, but also for us startups.
Yep.
And I am one of the external
Evaluators.
at Vinnova, and sometimes it happens that a bullshit answer on this question flips over from a yes to a no when it comes to getting money.
And hopefully it's not a bullshit answer, it's a
No, it's
hopefully a
usually-
relevant answer.
Very often it's really bullshit answers.
Okay.
We're working in the digital space, we don't use any water and we never travel. What kind of answer is that? I mean, it's really bullshit answers. So what you are talking about here could make a huge difference for your businesses. Just want to push that a little further.
So what most companies do, they pick which targets are the most relevant to them. What could actually be used for them to increase their profitability, to increase their operations and improve their operations. And then, they would probably say, and we also, our operations are related to these targets as well, but not as clearly or directly. And finally, there are other targets that we are not really interacting with, but, of course it has a relevance to our operations. And this exercise is quite good to do. So now we've talked far too long, but I thought it's difficult to ask you to do a lot of group exercises around Agenda 2030 if you don't know that much about the targets. So I hope this gave you a bit of a vision and an image of what the targets are, and we've actually printed them for you so you don't forget them. What we're going to ask you to do now is to do a little bit of a group exercise. So, workshop number 1. Now we would like, how many are we in here? How many are going to be part, is there anybody here who isn't going to be part of the workshop? 2, 3, you're not?
But you can participate, even you meet.
No. I mean, everybody should participate if you can. It's just if there's someone who's not going to, yeah. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, no. 11, 12, okay. Do you want to say something about how what your considerations were there?
Well, we're growing or acting on different markets. Then we have Africa, and then we have the kind of developed world with Sweden and especially in Scandinavia. But we look at our sector as we drive innovation in our sector, which is a non-innovative sector within the healthcare. You have a lot of old systems, you have a lot of personnel or employees that is not educated within the innovation space or in the technical space where they need help to innovate. So the innovation that comes into that sector drives effectiveness, or you get a higher output from the meeting with the healthcare and the patients. So that's very interesting, I think, all over the world right now.
Yeah.
But then it comes down to personal behavior and adoption and implementation of these kind of services. And there we have an educational issue or a knowledge issue where they don't know how to act on technology, which we do.
But interestingly, when we thought about it, realized that people are probably more prone to welcome the innovations in our market, being sub-Saharan Africa, because the colossal systems of healthcare has not been built up in that same sense, and also there's the current finding the way to the most efficient solution, which is sort of a mindset that I think.
Interesting. But it's quite interesting then that when you talk to your clients, you can actually relate to Agenda 2030 targets that are beyond the health target, for sure, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Great. And then we had the team here, and you, I think, were discussing a lot of the social social targets, right?
So the idea was to basically match, when it comes to healthcare, gender, as they mentioned as well, access to both healthcare and also providers of healthcare. So educate those women to be doctors as well. So if you have half of the population not working as doctors, so that will also increase the access that way. Infrastructure, just access to the hospitals themselves, having more hospitals available for this increasing population. I think that was the idea behind.
Good. So I think what we're trying to show, it may feel a bit strange to talk from your business perspectives about, you know, doing it from these targets. But I think that what we're trying to show is that this is becoming more and more a common language around the world. Agenda 2030 or the SDGs are becoming more and more implemented. So the more you can relate to them in your communication, or at least have them as one of your perspectives, you are going to connect to your customers and the people that you are communicating with your solutions. Now, what we would like you to do is to use the same groups for simplicity. Take the next step and you're going to have to combine this with coffee, which I hope is fine. But you have until 4 o'clock, and you can be wherever you want to, if it's in here, but we gather here at 4 o'clock.
Now we shall move on to workshop number 3 directly, where we shall discuss how your company can communicate a contribution to the client's sustainability. So you have just discussed what challenges your clients may have connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And now we will ask you to think about how you can communicate, about how you can help them solve these challenges. Before we do that, we shall give you a couple of tools how to do that. First of all, as Malin has already told you, you may use the entire palette of the SDGs. You can, not now, but in general, you can go in under each goal, read about the goals that they have listed under these. You can read about targets, about ambitions, about good practices, good examples that the Agenda 2030 has for you. You can also think about what kind of challenge your client has, what sustainable goal this challenge is related to, and how your solution can fit to this paradigm. For example, maybe your client struggles a lot with reducing their carbon emissions. Maybe their carbon emissions internally from the sources that they own, like company cars, or maybe their carbon emissions externally, indirect carbon emissions that come, for example, from their clients and customers driving there, traveling, from raw materials. Maybe you have a digital solution that may help them improve the efficiency of their calculations. So think in terms of your solutions. What do you help them do? What job do you help them improve? Another issue that you may consider, for example, if your solution helps reduce work-related stress at a hospital, at a facility, or maybe for patients. Maybe you can help them reduce the lost work cases, sjukfrånvaro. Another issue, the digitalization of the entire process that relates to this area and to this area. How you can help them calculate, become more efficient, maybe save paper, maybe save meetings. Plastic, another issue, which can relate to plastic waste from the healthcare. Maybe you have solutions that can help optimize the resource efficiency. Maybe you can help them trace their plastic. Maybe you can help them optimize their supply chain of plastics. Another group of issues is more social, the well-known Me Too campaign or movement. Maybe they struggle with gender diversity internally, or maybe they have to improve the access to healthcare in their markets where they operate. And just think very broadly, these picture may relate to many different issues, like, for example, antibiotics in the environment, pharmaceuticals in the environment, or maybe the access to pharmaceuticals and to healthcare in the world. How your solutions can map in this question. So, think that all these solutions may help you formulate your offering in a more efficient way, both when you take part in procurement processes for the public sector, when you apply for funding from the public sector, because this is what the public sector looks at. It's very important that you are aware of the challenges and how you can help them solve these challenges within this paradigm.
So I think one example was we were talking about the prescription of sleeping pills nowadays, that it's gone up a lot, which not only has an impact on health, of course, but it actually has a really big impact on the environment, because we release a lot of chemicals in our sewage systems, and it's really costly for the sewage management companies that are owned by us, the taxpayers, to actually handle this. Linköping, where I live, is the pilot place, I think, in the world actually of really cleaning the sewage water from medications. They do it with ultrasound. Ultrasound, I think so anyway. I'm not really familiar with the process, but I know it's a bloody costly process to implement, and they do it because they want to avoid all these medications to come out in the waterways of Östergötland. So, and that may not be one of the objectives that you think of right away, to connect a solution that can decrease the usage of medications, that you would connect that to life below, or actually rather the clean water and sanitation and life below water, because it could affect the habitats of fish, etc., in those streams. But so sometimes your solution actually improves areas that you wouldn't really think of. Now, when you do this exercise and you look at the communication, try to be as sharp as possible, and don't hesitate to go into the SDGs homepage. If you just search SDG and United Nations or something, you'll come to the main page where you can find the sub-targets. Because sometimes it's better to be specific. This is the sub-target, we could support you. So how would you communicate this? How would you phrase? That's what we want you to look at now, the work you've already done in workshop number 2. And this will be very different because you have very different solutions. But try to look at it from the perspectives that you have with the solution that you've already looked at in workshop number 2. So you have another 20 minutes to do that, and then we'll gather here again. I think one of the purposes with all these workshops is actually to show you that this is not rocket science. It's nothing new. When you look at all the 17 targets, none of them feel like, oh my God, I had no clue we needed to work with this. You know we need to work with that on a global level, right? It's just a new structure, it's a framework, and it's a language. But the main point is that this is being implemented more and more in the entire world. It was taken in 2015. We have until 2030 to implement it worldwide. And companies, regions, municipalities, private healthcare providers, etc., are implementing this as we speak. So it's going to become much more important in future procurement processes. Margareta already mentioned Vinnova to you when you apply for funds. But when you hand in proposals in the future, you are more likely to have to relate to the sustainable development goals. And in those cases, it's quite unlikely you're going to be able to do it, to say, oh, we can help you with target number 8. Because you can tell that entities are becoming better and better at working with the targets. So they use the sub-targets, they start using the indicators. Have you seen a balanced scorecard? Yes, you know what that is essentially. It's like a way of following up on your targets, and many companies use it. It's a very basic tool. The SDGs is actually like a balanced scorecard for the world, and it applies to all of us. It's a good. I think it was actually someone from Scania, maybe their sustainability officer or something, that said, we love the SDGs because it's like getting a structure for reporting, for following up, for communicating. We get it for free. The UN provided it to us. And it's really, I think, one of the main reasons why it's become successful in its implementation is because it's so visual. Now you saw all our little games here with the little, with the targets, etc. It works. People recognize it. And that's actually thanks to the Swedish guy who invented this visual system. And I think he's the founder of the company that comes here tomorrow, right? New Republic. So they know he's a very cocky guy, but the system is excellent. And what they don't know about communication is probably not worth knowing, actually. So let's talk a little bit about. Or maybe we should take some of the examples, actually, of
not this, but you mean those, yeah.
I think this is interesting. This just came out on the government's webpage. It says that key indicators are going to support the municipalities and the regions' work with Agenda 2030. So now the government is actually helping the healthcare sector or the public sector in Sweden to work with these targets.
Gothenburg, the environmental party is trying to implement the Agenda 2030 in their work with the budget for the municipality.
So they're even connecting money to the targets.
Region Skåne, the environmental strategy that is called the Öppna Skåne 2030 is connected to Agenda 2030, is backed up by the agenda.
And this, I would say, is quite typical. We see that in many regions that they haven't really had, because they have very long planning processes. So we haven't really yet seen that, they haven't really had time to rework everything, but they are at least doing like that. They take existing plans and agendas like this one, and they show how it relates to Agenda 2030. The next version will be based on Agenda 2030 for sure.
And Malmö, actually one of the most ambitious cities in the world, I would say, in terms of Agenda 2030, and the only city so far in Sweden who has implemented the agenda as their own goals. And Malmö is always cited as one of the best examples in Sweden of how to work with the agenda on a municipal, public level.
So this is going to meet you more and more in procurement processes. So, which is one of the reasons why Margareta wanted to have this afternoon as a part of your event here. Now, is that all? Did we have anything else? No, that was it. Yeah. So let's go back a little bit to the groups. Now, we asked you to pick a solution and show how it relates to some of the targets and how you could communicate it. Can we hear some examples? Please, go ahead.
Okay, yes. So we picked two of the goals, and we tried to work with both our companies and see how we could help our clients to reach or improve on those goals. And one of the goals that we chose was number 8.
Okay, great.
About economic growth.
This didn't work. There we go. Sorry.
It's good we have you, Margaretha.
There we go. Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
both our so the client that we chose, which is relevant to both our companies, would be primary care or primary care centers, and we can help them reduce healthcare professional stress and anxiety. We think that we can help them improve on the productivity and efficiency as a group in the workplace, and also lower sick leave costs. And all those three can be directly linked to the second, what was it called?
The sub-target.
Target, yes, under goal number 8. So we could tell the client that we can help you improve specifically on target number 2 and goal number 8 in this way.
Because of course, decent work is valid also for healthcare workers, right? So it's a very logical target.
Yeah.
And do you want to continue?
Yes. Goal number 9 was about innovation and infrastructure. And with the same client, we can help them to change from an old analog way of working to a more modern and efficient digital technology. And we can help them because we know that they have a workforce which is in part more skeptical to new technology, and so we can help them with that transition, and we could link that to target number 4.
Under
goal number 9.
yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent, and I think that was also valid for your group, right? I'm looking at you.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
We almost had the same talk there about the same interest part, but we got stuck in the 17th goal, which was partnership, after that discussion, because we are not able to do a difference without, we're too small to make a difference. So we need more strategic partnerships and need more involvement with other players. So we both have these type of private clinics, or in our case corporate healthcare, but we also need to make a difference together with, like, for example, Microsoft or Tieto, which has a global distribution network. So we're a part of their benefit as well, or a part of their product as well, in our area. So to make a big impact, or a bigger impact in the world, we have to make strategic partnerships, and that can impact a lot of the other goals as well, together with these and those types of individual cases.
And I think it's a very valid point, because of course Agenda 2030 is not only relevant when you look at your customers, it's also relevant when you look at partnerships and finding your partners and who to team up with, etc. Because if those are big companies, they are quite likely to work with the Agenda 2030 targets. And then you can see, okay, where could we catch on? It sounds like it's very, I realize it sounds like it's too simplistic now, and of course it is. We're doing a 3-hour afternoon workshop, right? But it is going to be more and more relevant. And the more you understand the targets, the better you're going to be able to communicate with clients, partners, etc. Now, how do you think that you can communicate if you approach Microsoft, for instance, or Tieto? What communication can you use? How can you show them?
So what we are looking into is that we're looking into different players or different interest parties. So for Microsoft, we're a product in their new platform. So we're the layer between them and the product, or we're a layer between the consumer and their user, which is the private clinic, and then you have Microsoft. If we look at the clinic, we're the layer between them and their patient, but we're also giving them data of where we're gathering a bigger chunk of data instead of them handing in paper, they're throwing the paper away. So they get a lot of more statistics, a lot of more. So it's also always finding the useful points for that type of thing. And I like what you said earlier is to think about like the interest pyramid, where you have like the individual at the top and then the state or the government at the bottom, and try to find the communication points for that type of level.
For the different stakeholders,
Exactly.
It's a good point. I don't think I talked about the pyramid, but I'm going to use that from now on. It's perfect.
We have a lot of common interests, but there's also some differences where I realize that for us, since our customers usually don't have the money, they love the product but they don't have the financing. So for us to sell, we actually have to sell the product to the clinic, which is easy pieces, but then we have to sell the financing bit
to someone else.
And there are some other, we will communicate some things to the one and some things to the other. But it's I've had a couple of little aha moments here, so I'm glad.
But I think I don't remember exactly what your solution does, but I've seen. Actually, I used to work in the, do you know Operation Smile? The organization that helps children with cleft. I built up that organization in Sweden. So I've actually been a bit involved in healthcare, but from a very weird perspective. I'm not a healthcare person. Anyway, it's a huge organization around the world, but there was no Swedish chapter, so we wanted to have Swedish volunteers and fundraising in Sweden, and that's the role they gave me to initiate that and build it up, which was a great experience. And what is interesting is those kind of solutions that actually are applicable in developing countries to improve healthcare. Many times the Postal Code Lottery, through their foundation, Postal Stiftelsen, are interested in those kind of projects. And I've seen lately that the Postal Code Foundation, they don't give, and they are actually quite easy to get money from, for specific projects. And then you don't have to apply to get money every year. You apply for a specific project. And they will not give money to anyone who doesn't relate their work to Agenda 2030 now. It wasn't like that when I was the General Secretary for Operation Smile, but I've seen on their homepage, everything is connected to Agenda 2030. So I think if you're in the developing organizations like world, this is absolutely a must, because they are working already looking at where they fit into this piece of puzzle. Now, I just wanted to add something to what you're saying, because I think it's difficult to get into that now because we would need more specific examples. But I think what you're going to see quite soon, let's say this sub-target to number 8. If you go to a big healthcare provider, if it's a region or whatever it is, you're probably going to see in a year's time or even sooner that they will use the indicators that are already established in the framework of the SDGs, and they will say which of these indicators are we going to use and in what way, and adapt them slightly, which means that you're actually going to know their targets. So you're going to be able to say, okay, they have a target of decreasing this stress-related problems among their workforce with 30% based on this kind of measurement. Well, if you can show them that this solution should actually decrease stress-related problems, at least in the people in this working space, it's much easier to put money on the value of your solution when you relate them straight to the indicators. And this is not, this is not really rocket science, because it's exactly the same thing you do when you go and sell something to a company. You look at what are their targets. Well, they want increased sales with 10%. Well, then you try to show how your solution can help them to increase sales. It's exactly the same. It's just so much better targets, than just increasing sales. Even though they probably will still have the targets of increasing sales. But now maybe not the healthcare sector. But you know what I mean. So I think this is to go deeper in, and it's not a big work. It's not that difficult actually, and it's quite self-explaining or self-explanatory. And the indicators are so easy to use, I would say. And they are going to be much easier to use because your clients are going to have them specified for you. So you get like a balance scorecard that works all over the world. Did we have one more group? Or
Yeah, we have one group left.
sorry, yes, I forgot you. Please let us know. What were you?
Yeah, well, the other person that we were talking about, his company, he's not here. He's about to leave. But I'm going to have to, because I interviewed him, had a long experience, and I was really curious to find out.
And you have to speak loud now for the camera.
All right, I'll try. So, obviously, number 3, but I suppose that's not any news. So, number 9, I would have to say as well, because this person's concept it was to change a little bit the infrastructure when setting a diagnosis in chronic diseases, and because of the fact that there is shortage of primary healthcare doctors, and the disease that he's focusing with is COPD, a disease with that too many patients suffer from that. So he was actually in a way trying to change the infrastructure of the system, how you meet those patients and how you monitor their disease and how you can use the resources in a more effective way. So number 9, I would have to say, was the main focus of our discussions, and trying to help patients with chronic diseases getting more help without having to increase the resources.
Exactly, and I think that's maybe the key point there, right? The resource issue. Because in almost everywhere in the world, that's our big challenge. We can sort out more and more diseases, but there's a limit to our resources. So the more these innovations can help to change processes and make it easier to treat more patients without using more resources, the better. And if you can quantify that in these kind of chronic diseases and say, with this solution, you're going to be able to help patients with the same amount of resources and show the increase, then you have a very strong case because it's a quantified correlation to the Agenda 2030 targets. Did you bring up anything else in your team?
Yeah, well, quite a lot actually.
Do you want to share with us?
Definitely. Well, it's most that it's not my thoughts actually, it's this other person's thoughts, but I can definitely share them with you. I don't think that you think about it. So, actually, when you just improve the infrastructure and you can use your limited resources to give, a better healthcare treatment to more patients, that's what, it results to being able to increase the quality of life in a huge amount of patients if you use the resources to treat much more patients. And why not try to decrease the amount or the duration of the disease exacerbation probably, and making those patients being functional again in a really quite faster than it would be with the usual infrastructure. So everything that we discussed about derives from trying to change in the infrastructure and trying to provide a better quality of healthcare to many patients, but using the limited resources. So that was the main point. But it comes with quite a few results from trying to change in the infrastructure in such a way. So it's mostly the things.
And there's one sub-target in number 3 that says something about providing equal health care to everybody. And that, of course, relates to this.
Definitely. Because of the fact that when you have a chronic disease and you have a large number of patients, it's definitely really hard using those limited resources to provide equal health to everybody. It's almost impossible. But when you have something that helps the infrastructure that exists right now, well, you're probably going to have to get to some better results, or they can be worse.
Interesting. Yes?
We were talking about the same thing, and we put it into the issue of if you have taken hand of the point 3, you
some way also are taking hand of number 1 and number 4, because you maybe can make people able to have a job, take an education, and so if you're talking the sustainable development goals, you can actually talk through the whole schedule or a lot of them.
You're right.
If we have time for that. We went very long.
And that's exactly the concept of the indivisibility. They can't really be divided, but you can always show certain correlation that is maybe the strongest, but you will find correlation virtually everywhere because if you really want to take it if people are healthier, they will be able to work, they will be able to send, and then they will be able to send their kids to schools, you improve access to education, they will earn money to put food on the table, so it will be more nutritious for the children, so they will be less poor. And people who aren't that poor are actually, many are they will maybe be able to invest in clean energy solutions and blah, blah, blah. I could continue this further, so you can actually correlate all the targets.
And people get healthier when they have access to clean water, when they have access to clean sea life and life on Earth. So there is really a correlation.
Yeah. But you can always try to find the most strong correlation, because otherwise it gets a little bit, Otherwise you'd say, my solution helps everything. It's like I used to work for Ericsson for 12 years, and I'm not so impressed with their SDG work, to tell you the truth. At least not what's public. Because what they say is essentially, we work with all the targets. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not really serious. Because I find it so much more serious when you look at Scania, IKEA, many of these companies that are very, very particular how their operations relate to each target. And then they say the others aren't unimportant. It's just that we don't think maybe we influence them that much, or that they don't relate to us that strongly as the other ones. So
isn't that the case in all types of CSR work? Is transparency.
Yeah.
We're really good at this, but don't kill us over not top notch on this.
A very good mental exercise is to think your product or solution. If we have a Swedish company, quite small company, maybe you do not relate internally in your operations in Sweden, in Helsingborg, in Ängelholm, whatever, to no poverty. But maybe your product relates to no poverty. So think a bit outside your walls. What impact your product solutions have on your customers, on their customers.
And also now you're entrepreneurs, so far your operations are probably not that vast, and many of you are in the digital field, so maybe you don't have that much production, etc. But when you're in if you have maybe a bit bigger operation and it involves more parts in the chain, then it's also very easy many companies look at their business. I don't know if you've seen Preem's latest figures about how much they've decreased their carbon dioxide emissions. And they have, they work a lot with their internal operations, but they forget to say that the absolutely majority of the carbon dioxide that's released because of Preem is, of course, what comes out of the cars that their clients are using.
Yeah.
But that's not within their operations. Well, no, but it's their product. So, to look at how the entire value chain, from suppliers, transport, even if it's not your van, you order the transport, you can actually affect. The more you put requirements on your suppliers, the more you can actually influence how they relate, how well they can relate to Agenda 2030. And that's maybe it's also something to keep in mind, which is a little bit aside of all this discussion, but if the best thing all of us can actually do is to always put requirements in our personal life. If you go into a store, like the other day I was in my local supermarket, there was no salmon to be bought that was MSC branded, and my entire dinner was based on salmon. But at least I made sure to say, I have to buy this today because otherwise I would have to change everything, and I have half of the ingredients at home. But I don't think it's acceptable that you only sell salmon that's not MSC certified. One of my big visions now is actually to try to figure out a way to work with espresso house, because they're becoming so big in Sweden and they're so useless at their waste management, etc., which is just, it gives me the freaks. Unfortunately, we're environmental consultants, so we can actually go to them and say, hey, let's talk about this. But there's so much we can do as consumers, as companies. I work a lot with renewable transports, and you say to people or to companies, so how do you work with renewable transports? Oh no, but we don't have our own transports. I talked to Stadium once. We don't have our own transports. We use PostNord, and I think they're fairly sustainable. I'm like, yeah, but
you have to know your suppliers also, how they are working. If you should.
No, of course.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? Yeah. And if Stadium causes something, they cause a lot of transport.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, did you ask PostNord if they can deliver renewable transports? No, we actually didn't bring up that discussion with them. And I'm like, well, do that next time. Region Östergötland, they came out with a big procurement a couple of years back, and they had no requirements on renewable fuels. And we were like, are you nuts? This is, a procurement that's going to last for 5 years. Fortunately, they withdrew it because there was so much protest, and they redid it. And now they're among the top procurement entities within the public sector in Sweden when it comes to renewable transport. So there's so much you can do just by being a customer, which you have to remember also when it comes to this, because if you don't do your full homework, you're not really credible. So with that, do we have the last minute, any questions or comments or anything you want to add, or did it give you any new insights?
Yes.
Plenty.
Good. I'm happy.
That's the reason why we invited. You have such a difficult name. It's 2050 and 2030 and 20 here and 20 there.
Well, 2050 is when the world is supposed to be fossil free. So that's why we're
2050. I wondered. So 2050 Consultancy is here to talk about Agenda 2030 in order to enlighten you and us within Health Tech Nordic, so that we can make a change for the future, which we are already doing. And you are my heroes. You are here. I love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To you, and thank you to you.